Okay, should only take about 15 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. All cooked in.
How's the atmosphere?
Looks good.
All right, here we go.
Steve, you all right down there? Steve!
Joel's noticed his coworker Steve is in serious trouble, so he's acting on his first impulse. He's going into that tank to help his friend. Is this the right move? Wanting to help a coworker who's in trouble is natural, but Steve has collapsed in this confined space, and Joel doesn't know why. By following Steve into the space, he's setting himself up to be a second victim. Permit-required confined spaces, also known as permit spaces, can be dangerous and aren't limited to tanks like the one Joel is about to enter. They include spaces in a wide variety of work sites, spaces like utility manholes, storage bins, equipment pits and vaults, mixing tanks, sewers, ventilation ducts, holding tanks, pipelines, boilers, and vats. No matter the construction activity that's being performed in these confined spaces, there's one common element these spaces share. They can be extremely dangerous. So dangerous that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, has regulations in place to protect workers. What do the regulations mean by a confined space? A confined space is large enough for an employee to enter, has limited or restricted means of entry and exit, and is not designed for continuous occupancy. There's no doubt your work site contains confined spaces. Some of these spaces meet OSHA's definition of a permit-required confined space because they have one or more of the following characteristics. Contain or has the potential to contain a hazardous atmosphere. Contain material with the potential to engulf an employee who enters it. They have inwardly converging walls or a downward sloping floor to a smaller cross-section that could asphyxiate or trap an employee. Or they contain any other recognized serious safety or health hazard. Let's review OSHA's confined spaces training requirements in more detail. Training is required for all affected employees, which includes the entry supervisor, attendant, and the authorized entrant, the person who actually enters the space to perform assigned work. Affected employees must be trained to have the appropriate understanding, skills, and knowledge to perform their job safely in a permit space.
Training is extremely important so that people understand the hazards that they're going to be facing prior to making entry in confined spaces.
It's imperative that you actually practice hands-on. You have to learn the basic knowledge, and that's done in a classroom or through adult learning, alternative learning technologies. But we must actually physically practice it to get it right.
Now, let's watch a trained entry team work together to safely enter a permit-required confined space. We'll call your attention to the specific responsibilities of each team member as they perform their duties. This team consists of 3 individuals, an authorized entrant, an attendant, and an entry supervisor. These 3 distinct roles must be present in every permit space entry, although the entry supervisor's role can be filled by the entrant or the attendant. The authorized entrant is the person who will enter the permit space to perform assigned work. He has received specific training on the hazards that may be present in the space and the appropriate use of personal protective equipment, or PPE, and any rescue equipment, such as a tripod, body harness, and a retrieval line to make a non-entry rescue possible. The entrant must stay alert to hazards and exit the space immediately if a potential danger or prohibited condition is encountered. or if the attendant gives an order to evacuate the space. The entrant should be especially alert to warning signs, such as dizziness, sleepiness, breathing difficulty, and confusion. The second member of the team is the attendant. The attendant is required to remain outside the permit space during the entry operation and focus on monitoring the entrant. She must be trained in the potential hazards of the permit space and must continually monitor the space for those hazards. She must also monitor for unsafe conditions that may develop outside the space. When employees go into a confined space without understanding the dangers and without the appropriate equipment and training, those employees can get into serious trouble. Controlling the urge to help a coworker may be one of the most difficult challenges of a permit space incident. We saw that at the beginning of this training when Joel rushed to assist Steve. Seeing Steve collapse on the floor, Joel realizes Steve needs help. He may think Steve has become ill or he's injured himself. Joel's instinct is to rescue his friend, but his instinct is dead wrong. The first reaction of an attendant before getting help or calling rescue services may be to enter the space. Very often, they become second victims. Unfortunately, a number of confined space fatalities involve would-be rescuers. For this reason, it's critical attendants are fully aware of the hazards of a confined space and don't attempt a rescue unless they're trained to do so. Clearly, your employer wants to prevent the need for an emergency rescue. But if something should go wrong during a permit space entry, your employer is required to use a trained emergency rescue team. Let's watch how our experienced entry team handles a permit space incident.
Jill, are you okay? Jill, can you hear me? Dave, call emergency services. Jill's not responding.
Okay, bring her up.
When an incident occurs, time is critical. This means calling for help immediately so trained rescuers can be on the way while the attendant attempts a non-entry rescue to remove the entrant from the space. In our example, the entrant is wearing a safety harness with a cable attached to a mechanical retrieval device. Using this device, the attendant can lift the entrant out of the space without having to enter or wait for additional equipment. Over and over, experience has demonstrated permit spaces are dangerous places with the potential to cause very serious injury or worse. In fact, every year, OSHA is faced with investigating permit space fatalities.
The one thing that I wish everybody would take home with confined space training is that they need to be responsible for their own safety. Don't rely on somebody else to check the atmosphere, to do your lockout tagout for you. You're the one that's going in that space. You're the one that wants to be going home to your family. Make sure that you take the proper steps needed to keep you safe.